and Halpern.
Here. And so before we begin with our formal agenda, President Cartha, you have a statement to make?
Yes, thank you, Joey, for giving me a few minutes at the start of this committee meeting. I also wanted to just take an opportunity to thank Dr. Horton for the message that he shared to our community yesterday. I think it was an incredible message. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I strongly recommend, check your email, go to the District 65 website and read it. It's a really powerful statement about what's going on in our world right now and his vision for our district. And setting the tone for what his leadership is going to be. So thank you very much for sharing that message with us. It's a hard one to follow up, and I hesitate doing so, but felt that it was important to say something as well from a board perspective. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. How many more names will we be adding to an already too long list? How many more hashtags are we going to create? It's simply too much. Black Lives Matter. These are simple words that should be uncontroversial. Black Lives Matter. But we need to say it over and over again because with everything that is going on in our country, the continued cruel and needless murders of Black people at the hands of those claiming to be protectors of our community, the disproportionate rates of COVID-19 deaths in the Black community, even the indignity of how social distancing rules are enforced differently in white and Black neighborhoods. It is clear that the message has not stuck. Black Lives Matter. I continue to be dumbstruck by people who engage in mind-boggling acts of mental contortion to dismiss or minimize the role that race and racism plays in these acts of police brutality, or in the disparities in health treatment and outcomes, or in the ignorant and hateful words of our national leadership. Black Lives Matter. But let's be clear. These are not problems that exist only in our national politics or in rural communities or in the vague out there. Our community here in Evanston and in District 65 continues to struggle with the truth and urgency of these words. By now, most of us have probably seen or heard of the incident of an Evanston police officer accosting a young Black man with what appears to be excessive and unnecessary force, simply for trying to bear witness. What does it say about our society that my first thought upon hearing of this incident was relief that the young man was not dead? Black Lives Matter. And it isn't just our police and criminal justice systems. We have to confront how racism and white supremacy show up in our schools, and how we advocate for our children, and how we respond to efforts to change longstanding practices that our data shows to be detrimental to Black and Brown students. Even in how we respond to data. Is the initial reaction to want to justify the disparities or to suggest that income or some other factor is the issue and not race? Is the urge to ask for more data, even when the data continues to show us what we already know to be true? Are we more likely to criticize a tangential comment from a board member or administrator or educator rather than reflect deeply and sit in the uncomfortable truth of what the data might be telling us? Is there a weariness that the discussion always centers on racial equity? Black Lives Matter. And the truth is that educational policies and practices that are racially inequitable and anti-Black don't just hurt Black students. They hurt every single student in our schools. We often talk about how detrimental it is for our Black students not to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. I don't think we talk often enough about how detrimental it is for our white students not to regularly see Black excellence and the contributions of Black innovation and expertise in our collective history, how that absence only hardens the biases already proven to be developing in our children. Black Lives Matter. It is important that we do better as a community, that we hold our police force and city representatives to high standards of accountability to address discriminatory behavior against our Black and Brown citizens, that we hold both of our school boards and administrations to high standards of accountability to eliminate the racial gap in student outcomes, and that we individually hold ourselves and each other to high standards of accountability to address our own participation in or resistance to anti-racist efforts to dismantle the policies and practices that our data shows us are daily harming our Black and Brown children and families. And I want to personally offer a plea as a brown woman of Indian origin to fellow members of the South Asian and Asian American communities. I've been hearing a lot from white leaders speaking to white community members about their role in dismantling institutional racism. And I think I have a responsibility as an Indian American leader to declare that our community also has a role and responsibility in dismantling institutional racism. I often describe us as holding a sort of middle ground in racial politics in this country. Many of us suffer racist attacks against us, particularly post 9/11 and what we are seeing now with respect to COVID-19. But we also often experience the benefits of whiteness and are held up by white America as the model minority, mostly to further an anti-Black agenda. We cannot keep falling for that. We cannot take the middle ground here. When we talk about anti-racism, we can either stand for perpetuating anti-Black policy, or we can stand for dismantling it. And I hope with all my heart that you will join me in standing for dismantling it. And for all of us, it is important that we don't stop saying it until it is reflected in the experience of Black members of our society. Black lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Suni. Is there anybody else that would like to make a statement? Okay. Thank you, Suni. And to echo Suni's comments to Dr. Horton, thank you for sending a very clear message of what leadership is going to look like at the top of District 65. That was, it was not just a strong statement from you personally, but it was on point, it was timely, and it's very much appreciated by me as an individual board member, but as a community member as well. So we have, for our finance committee meeting, which seems so small, we have 7 action items and 1 discussion item on the docket for this evening. We begin with a review of the minutes of May 4th. And I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments about the minutes of the May 4th meeting. But if not, oh, was there a question?
I said no.
Okay. The Finance Committee recommends that the minutes of the May 4th, 2020 Finance Committee meeting be approved as presented.
Second.
M.
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes. The Click Insurance renewal premium payment, this is an annual action item. Raphael, is there anything new or information that you'd like to add on this action item?
I just wanted to recap why we bring this up. The district is part of a membership of about 300 school districts that part of a co-op that jointly buys commercial liability insurance to protect the interest of the district. And every year around this time, we come up before the board to let you know what the renewal amount will be for the premium. Now, if you notice, the premium is going up close to 10%, 9.8% from last year. And that really has a lot to do with our claim history based on claims we filed before the cooperative. That's the reason for the increase. Any questions, please?
I do not. And how does this premium compare to fiscal year 20's premium?
It's higher by 9.8% from prior year, and it's based strictly on claim history.
Great.
If we file more claims, the insurance co-op attempts to make sure the claims, the risk are spread equally among members. So if we have lower claim, our rates will go down. If we have higher claims, it will go up. So that's based on our claim history.
Thank you.
When you say we, Raphael, do you mean we, the cooperative, or we, the district?
We, the district. So compared to what the co-op does is they look at the relative level of claims among all members. And members that have lower than average claims are actually refunded money. So their rates are lower. But folks that have higher than what the average claim rate is, they ask to contribute more in order to even the playing field, if you will.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
So we're going to have to contribute more because this has gone up by 9.8%, but it's something that fluctuates from year to year.
Yes, it is, depending on how much claims we file, how many claims we file before the co-op, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about this? Okay, if not, the Finance Committee recommends that the insurance renewal and the budgeted payment of the premium of $380,104 for fiscal year 21 be presented to the full board for approval.
Second,
Kim,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
yes.
Halpern,
Yes. Action item 3 is the self-workers compensation renewal premium for fiscal year 21. Another big number, another annual number, and hopefully something that one day will be impacted by some proper workers' compensation legislation in the state of Illinois, but we'll keep waiting.
Yeah, this is very similar to the CLIC insurance premium. This one is workers' comp, and this has to do with two things that drove the increase that we've seen of 44%. We've never seen anything this high, but there were two reasons. It's depending on the payroll number, and because of the collective bargaining agreement that we just reached with our debt colleagues as well as GTAA, our payroll amount is higher. Therefore, the potential for filing claim is higher because of the higher payroll. Additionally, going back the last 3 years, there's been a higher claim rate in our district compared to the average. And so they use a 3-year moving average. And so based on that, they're looking to recapture the payout that the cooperative has made, hence the increase of 44%. So what we're hopeful about doing is going forward, try to look at ways to educate our colleagues about things that can be done to reduce the amount of claim that will be filed before the self-cooperative.
Can you give an example of what types of things members could do that would help lower this overall number?
We can do more education among our members, particularly as it relates to our building and ground staff, making sure that we do a better job of cleaning our buildings so we don't have any spill and fall in front of the building, on the side of the building. We do that now, but I'm sure we can improve that. So any claim that an employee brings that is related to workman's comp, we will try to educate our teammates to make sure that they are more careful in the way they move around on district facilities. Those are some of the things that we can do, education and information to improve the level of claim that we file.
Okay, because this claim itself, I mean, in the chart, you know, the 13% increase of professional employee estimated payroll, the overall exposures to the district as it relates to payroll relate to our contract. But what you're talking about are educating people on better workplace habits to prevent the need for tapping into this insurance. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions about this premium? If not, the Finance Committee recommends that the workers' compensation renewal and the budgeted payment of the premium of $537,805 for fiscal year 21 be presented to the full board for approval.
Second.
Great. Kim,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
yes,
Halpern,
Yes. Also on our annual docket, the Finance Committee is going to review the prevailing wage resolution for fiscal year 21. Raphael, can you share the annual
Sure.
prevailing wage agreement?
This is pursuant to legislation passed by the state legislator that requires that any municipality or government-related entity that contracts out for services with a vendor ensures that those vendors pay prevailing wage, and that rate goes up every year. So we're required to do that to make sure folks are not paid substandard wages. That's what the requirement of this is. So we have to bring it before the board as required by any other governmental entity to have the governing board approve the prevailing wage. That's what this is all about.
So as a governing body who works to approve plans for things like capital improvements through contractors, we understand this is an agreement that we ask people to commit to. How do we know that they're in fact doing it? What evidence do they give or assurance do they give the district that they're in fact doing it?
One thing that we do every time we go out, we actually let out bids. There's a requirement in there where the bidders have to certify that they will be paying a prevailing wage. And periodically, the Department of Labor in the state of Illinois will do audits, and they will ask us to contact those vendors and provide them payroll data. And those payroll data doesn't support the certification that the vendor makes, that will be in violation of the rules. And it can result in jeopardy to that business. That's how it's monitored.
Thank you. Any other questions around the prevailing wage agreement resolution? So if not, the Finance Committee recommends that the prevailing wage resolution for fiscal year or for 2020, 2021 be presented to the full board for adoption.
Second.
Tanya Vudi,
yes,
Kim,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes. And the working cash fund transfer for fiscal year 21.
This is part of the requirements of the Illinois School Code too. And what it is, the working cash fund is a bank for school districts. So there are funds that are kept in there. And what is required is in case the district needs loan, instead of going out to a third-party bank that will charge us interest, what we do, we put the money in the working cash. So if the district ever needs loan, then those loans can be made from the working cash fund, funds, and then can be used for operating expenses. But once the money is available, those funds have to be paid back to the working cash fund. So the working cash fund essentially is a bank that the district uses in case the district, any of the other funds, need additional funds to be able to operate.
And this resolution is us as a board agreeing to naming you, Raphael, as our CFO to be the treasurer and the holder of those funds and manager of those funds.
And to also indicate that in case we need to borrow money to be able to show up any of our other funds, it actually allows us to be able to transfer money from the working cash fund to any of the other funds that need shoring up. And once that is done, and those funds get back to where they need to be because of really the receipt of tax extension, then those funds have to be paid back to the working cash fund. So it authorized the financial team in the district to be able to transfer money from the working cash fund as a loan in case it is needed. and then pay it back as required. But I just want to say we don't anticipate needing this because we have enough reserves, but we just do it as a matter of law, just in case it ever comes to be.
Thank you. Any questions around the working cash?
Just a quick one. Is there a certain percentage or a certain amount that has to be kept in the fund, like a minimum amount?
There's no minimum amount, no.
Any other questions?
No.
All right, so the Finance Committee recommends that the working cash fund transfer resolution for fiscal year 21 be presented to the full board for adoption.
Second.
Tanya Vudi,
Yeah.
Kim,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes. All right, next agenda item, I feel like is 3 years in the making. It's the Power School Student Information System Agreement.
I will actually say it's been longer. It's been longer term coming. The district has a student information system that is based on the information I've been able to glean from the folks who've been here longer than I have. It's been in use for about 10 years. And what we found out is over the years, the company was acquired by a company, Tyler. And the company acquired it, but I've not really invested in upgrading the capability of the software. So it's a lot of things that we need for a student information system to do that the current system doesn't have. For example, we use the SIS system, Student Information System, for student record. We use it for grading. We use it for some lesson planning. So we use it for a lot of things. And we've just not been able to get SIS K-12 to do that. In addition to that, we've had problem with consistency and uptime. Uptime is how long the system actually stays on without going down. We've had consistent problem with the system going down a lot and us not being able to do a lot of things. This system also, since it has student information, feeds into a financial system as far as the fee collection process. And since the system is not as robust and it's not redundant as it needs to be, our student billing, sometimes we run into problem with it, whereby sometimes we have double billing, we have billing error. So we've been trying to get this done for a while. And so that's why, and another part of it that I think is pretty important is that it's still server-based. As most of us know now, most technology, software now cloud-based, whereby if you have access to the internet, you can easily jump on and be able to do the work you need to do. With the system that we currently have with SIS K-12, everything is still server-based. So being able to do work on that system is limited to having access in our facility. So if you're out of our facility, there's a way to be able to tap into the system, is VPN. But sometimes VPN gets clunky and it's not always reliable to be able to get on it. So those are some of the reasons that we know of that we need to migrate from the current system to a new system. So we went out and we did an RFP, and then we talked to 3 of the finalists. One of the finalists is Power School. Another one is Skyward. And the final one is Infinite Campus. We had a lot of stakeholders engagement. We reached out to our users, administrators, school-based personnel. We also reached out to cabinets and got them involved. We even had a few days of having the vendors come onto the district and do demo for us, so we can get an idea of which of the products that were placed before us are the most reliable for what we need to do. And after those demos were concerned, we had the vendors set up what we'll call a playground for us, whereby they gave us access and we can go in and try to do the things that we ordinarily would expect to do with a new system to ensure that what we agree on has the ability to do the robust things that we need. After much consultation, grading, and feedback from all the stakeholders, it was decided that we go with Power School. Interestingly enough, Power School is also the SIS system that is used by our iSchool partner ETHS 202. It is a modular power school. So that's the one that we've agreed to. And so for the last month or so, we've been going back and forth trying to reach an agreement on the contract language. And we finally reached that agreement late on Friday, and which is why we were able to sign the agreement on their side. And we brought it before the board so we can have you take a look at the agreement, ask us questions, so we can go forward and execute on our side and put the system in place. Once we have that in place, and then we can start the implementation process to move towards using PowerSchool. The initial cost of getting the system in place is $162,000, and that includes the transition into a new system. It includes training and includes the work on the back end to get it done. After that is done, the yearly subscription is going to be about $56,000 plus 4%, which is the CPI that was agreed to. So it's going to be, so after the first year of implementation, the second year will be approximately $61,000, and then $61,000 plus 4%. The current system that we have right now, K-12, we pay approximately $58,000 in annual subscription fee for it, even though most of the time, everyone is frustrated by the lack of use and the performance of the system.
Thank you, Raphael. Are there any questions around this? This is a big contract. It's a big change for the district. It touches every employee and students, all the student records. Are there any questions for
Even
Raphael?
teacher grading too, for teacher grading. And it's also used for some of the instruction and stuff that we do on the back end too.
Yeah.
And I also add to, we'll be using, is it okay if I speak? I should ask that first.
Absolutely.
So it will also be used as a feature to help with our HR structure and our HR process. Raphael, can you give a little bit more about the HR feature?
And actually, the module that we bring before the board today is actually more SIS, Student Information System, Dr. Horton. And after we get past this, we're in the marketplace for an ERP, the Enterprise Resource Planning System, that will be used for HR and also for the finance system of the district. So this part here is only for the Student Information System, sir.
Just wanted to ask a quick question and just share an experience with K-12. I know in the middle school, you were able to access assignments that my kids did in the middle school, right? That isn't necessarily so in regards to what you saw in K-12 for the grammar school. You just get the grades that the kids got. So there was an inconsistency. So I'm hoping that as we adopt this, right, then we make sure that the components that inform parents to help us make sure that kids are on track, our kids are on track. Again, I hope that gets resolved with the adoption of PowerSchool. And again, if there's a way to utilize it as a way to engage parents in a more substantive way around how their own children are performing, that'd be really great. I know one of the critiques out there from parents and the remote learning is, again, the inconsistency. So again, not only would assignments get posted on K-12, but some teachers also would use Google Classroom. So then there's this kind of a disconnect. I imagine you'll see that from the parent survey that we're conducting with around the remote learning that occurred the past couple of months. But that's something that I've heard and I've experienced as a parent. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you, sir, Joe. And that's actually one of the good attributes of PowerSchool that we found compared to K-12. Quite frankly, K-12 is falling down. They fell down like 5 years ago. And it's just a complex process of selecting a new vendor. That's why it's taken so long to get here. We knew K-12 wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. The firm that acquired it years ago made the strategic financial decision, not to invest in building the infrastructure behind it. So they were just kind of harvesting money behind it. So one of the key components of PowerSchool is the parent engagement portion that we are very excited about, that will do some of those things that you mentioned, Sergio.
having the Power School system in both the high school and our district will help too for parents, because it'll be the same system. And parents will definitely appreciate that, so there's not a learning curve.
Yes, sir.
So this contract, Raphael, also includes 12 days of on-site training.
Yes, sir.
I imagine that's for people, generally that are working on the back end setups and reports and things like that. What does the training look like for the end users, the people that have to take the daily attendance, those types of people that need training that maybe don't need a whole day of training?
So the 12 days of training that we negotiated, we can use it any way we see fit. So some of that training, it will be for setup and for the folks who are going to be, the technical folks in IT who are going to be doing the work on it. But we are hoping that we can also use some of that time to be able to do a trainer-trainer model. So we have some of our team members who will get training from Power School and then go ahead and build a schedule of training for all the users district-wide. This will be the folks in the front office at our schools, and also some of our educators and our TAs in the classroom, so that they have the ability to be able to relate to the system and use it optimally for grading and things like that, and also to engage parents.
Great. Any other questions?
Just a quick one, Raphael, and I'm sorry if this was in the contract language somewhere. I didn't read it with a fine-tooth comb, but what kind of support does Power School provide within this contract? I know you said there's, our IT will be trained to do the back end, but it sounds like the previous system, they didn't do the maintenance. So what kinds of maintenance and updates and stuff like that will they do, and what will we do on our end?
Thank you for asking that question. That was actually why the contract negotiation process took 5 weeks. Once we had the agreement in principle, we then looked at the agreement with a fine-tooth comb. We engaged the service of our legal team. And what we found out is that based on the experience that he's had working with other school districts, about 12 of them, there were some issues that we are concerned about, especially as it relates to uptime, which is when the system is actually running the way it's supposed to be running. So we went back and forth. And some of the things that was promised to us is that they guarantee a certain percentage of uptime for the system to actually work the way it's supposed to. And one of the, even though they guaranteed in writing, we were looking for a way to edge against that, just in case they don't keep their word. So one of the things that we put in the contract is that if the uptime doesn't get to a minimum level, we have the ability to be able to give them notice after a year and go out to another, to kind of cancel the contract. They were really opposed to that, but we thought that was the leverage that we had to keep them honest. They don't want, it takes a lot of time for a software designer to get their money back. Normally it takes about 3 to 4 years before they get the money that they invest in putting the software together. So they were reluctant to give us the opportunity, the ability to be able to walk away from the contract year to year. But we were concerned enough about the same issues that you raised that we insisted on that being part of the agreement. And they eventually agreed to it. And we also wanted to make sure that by us insisting on that, agreeing to that, they wouldn't raise the rate, they would charge us year to year. So we put that in the language too. So the original rate of increase of 4% stayed, and we had the ability after the first year of providing notice whether we'll stay with them or not. So we really believe the best way to keep a vendor honest about their obligation to a customer is to have the ability to walk away if performance is not up to par. And we put that in the contract. And that's what took some of the longest time going back and forth to ensure that stays in the contract.
And then maybe this is related to the next discussion, but what kinds of security measures can they assure us of in terms of securing all that information in the system?
We actually, that was another thing that took a while. We engaged with our IT team in-house, and there's a system of security that is international. It's called ISO. And we wanted to make sure they were up to date with the ISO system. And IT folks actually went and did some research, and they gave us access to their security protocol. And I went in there and I played around in it. And IT specialist in-house, Eric Walker, also went in and played around in it. And what it does is they're third-party companies who have no interest in the company itself. All they do independent audit of security system. And based on what they find, they actually give a guarantee, if you will, of whether the system, the software is acceptable based on recognized standard. And based on the information they gave us, that is actually up to date. And what we've also required in the contract that we negotiate, that they provide the district update every 6 months if there are changes to the security protocol. So we feel reasonably confident that we have the language in the contract that require them to make sure that the security requirements are met.
Any other questions as it relates to Power School? Can you, Raphael, share kind of the rollout, the timeline? When will this start? Is this something that takes months to roll out and get implemented across the district?
It will take months. So what we decided to do is, because of all that is going on right now, is we're going to run parallel system. We're going to start the implementation of Power School in the back end, and we're also still going to run K-12. So our parents don't see any interruption in the level of services that they get. So as soon as the contract is signed, we've actually been doing some pre-work, but I didn't want to get us too far ahead of ourselves before we get approval from the board. But once we get the approval, we'll start the migration process. And we anticipate that it will probably take 6 months to a year. But what we are going to do, we're going to run a parallel system, and we're going to transition step by step so there are no disruptions. Because anytime you're doing migration of a new system, you always have technical issues. And we don't know what those are until we get into the middle of it. But we have the current system in place, and we're going to be doing some back-end stuff. So we are hoping that by early next year, we'll be able to roll out in more detail the new system. So currently, K-12 is still going to be the front end. Power School is going to be in the back end while we do the transition to the new system. And we hope to be able to have most of it completed by early next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to the Power School item? All right, if not, the Finance Committee recommends that the contract with Power School, a student information system platform, be presented to the full board for approval.
Second,
Kim,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
yes.
Halpern,
Yes. That was a long time coming. And our last action item today is about the cybersecurity assessment. And this one is a little bit different or new.
So this is somewhat related to the question that Sula asked earlier. What we've been finding out is, in trying to get up to date with security and systems, is that more and more school districts are being hit by ransomware, whereby a bad actor from across the way in foreign countries will come in and take over our system and then request that we pay them in Bitcoin. And if we don't, and what we've been finding out, two situations whereby a school district actually pays the ransomware and then the systems are released. Even when the systems are released, sometimes the personal information of the staff members are compromised and they're sold on the dark web, I'm sorry. So what we've been trying to do is the other situation is where the school district decides not to pay, and then it takes between 1 year to 2 years to be able to re-image all the information that has been trapped by the ransomware actors. So that's more and more of what we're seeing. It's actually happening everywhere. but it's happening more in the education field, especially in school districts, because as a rule, we tend not to think it's going to happen to us, and we tend not to invest resources. School districts don't invest resources in trying to do an independent analysis of where we are as far as the ability of threat assessment. I will give you an example of a situation that really brought this to fore, that made us realize we really need to do this. The city of Rockford School District, about 2 years ago, a ransomware was put on their system, and they were asked to pay a Bitcoin payment of about $2 million, or the system was going to be held on like that. And the district decided not to pay. And for about 2 months, they had no access to their system, no access to email, no access to the financial payment system, no access to HR system, nothing. And they had to start using pen and paper to start doing everything they used to do on computer systems. And they've spent up to date close to $2 million in trying to reassemble the system that they have in place. So in recognition of that, what the cyber experts have been telling us is that we need to do a threat assessment, not just depending on the folks that we have in-house, our employees, telling us how secure or redundant our system is. The best practice is actually to hire a third-party independent threat assessor to come in and actually try to see if they can penetrate the system. And if they can get in, they may use things like social engineering. They may use things as system vulnerability just to get in. Once they get in, then they'll be able to tell us where the weaknesses are, and they will help us come up with solutions to be able to show it up. And it's a moving target. So this is an option for us to do this for the first time. I anticipate this is going to be an ongoing assessment that we'll have to do. This will be the first in many, which is why we went out and we reached out to the leaders in the field of threat assessment, companies that work with major brokerage firms, with banks, with industrial organizations, with national security entities in the federal government. And we reached out to 4 companies, and we asked them to give us a proposal, if you will, of how much it will cost to be able to do this. Now, these services tend to be very expensive. In the private sector, it tends to run 6 figures very easily. But we're able to negotiate with some of the firms that we reached out to, and we appealed to their better senses and let them know we're a governmental entity, we're non-for-profit. We're requesting the same service that will provide to Blue Cross Blue Shield for 6 figures to see if they can provide it to us at a discounted rate. So the proposal that you see there reflect the discount that we've been offered by the firms. So the firms that we reach out to, we decided with consultation, after consulting with IT experts in-house, to go with Loris LLC. And that's the company that we're recommending that we sign this initial agreement with to go in and do the first year threat assessment for the district.
I know that there, some questions.
Yeah, just when they do the threat assessment, presumably they would find some vulnerabilities that we then need to address, right? When they look at all the systems and identify where we need to shore up our security. I'm just wondering what the potential budget implications of that would be. What are the typical kinds of vulnerabilities one might identify and then need to address? Is that simply, we just need to have the human resources to address them, our own IT expertise, or would that require additional services, software, et cetera? Do you have a sense of that? What typically school districts have to do?
See, what it does is the same thing really that is done in the private sector. What they will do, they'll come back with a report, and it varies. What has been the practice from the studies that we've done, the conversation with colleagues in the public and private sector, is that a lot of time is actually social engineering. That's what causes some of the problems, whereby someone gets an email that looks similar to what we were saying, and they will ask them to click it, and as soon as they click it, it takes over a system. That's one of the big finds that we see. Another thing may be a system patch, where they make recommendation that maybe the system that we currently use is not as up to date as we need for it to be, and then we'll go back and look at how to improve that. So it's kind of like moving the goalposts. So there's really no set way to determine what the outcome is going to be. What we know is that every time we come out with a solution, the bad guys come out with a counter solution. So it's an ongoing thing. There's really no destination. It's a process whereby we try to come up with ways to secure our system. And the way of doing that can be varied. But I don't anticipate it's going to involve hiring someone. I think with what we know about system is normally technology. It's also training to our users to make sure they're more aware and they're more suspicious about when they get stuff that looks legitimate, and just reaching out and verifying before they click on stuff.
Yeah, at our university at Northwestern, we do get periodic emails from our IT department warning us of different phishing scams, right? It will look like this, or it might use this kind of language. So that might need to, I don't know how many phishing scams District 65 gets.
Oh, we get a lot. We get a lot. We get a lot. I'll give you the latest example with someone saying, oh, I just changed my bank. I need for you to update my direct deposit. And it may be someone whose identity has been compromised, and that person will have their information. And they will send an email that look remarkably legit. And if we're not careful, we will actually change that person's direct deposit, and their paycheck will start being deposited into a bank overseas. So we get a lot of different threats right now. So this is just a way to keep us on our toes. Just to give you an idea, the cost of doing this compared to cost of trying to reassemble our system once it's compromised is a huge bargain. And that's why we wanted to go this route.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess my question, which is similar to Sula's, was, and I'm not sure there's an answer to this, is what if the risk assessment comes back and pushes District 65 systems or infrastructure in a way of safety and security, but our safety and security mechanisms match the industry standard, right? Where do we decide where to invest more or less, as it relates to, the software subscriptions we have, the SIS tools that we use, right? They're commonplace in education. So we all have the shared risk in use of those tools. We use overlapping vendors with a lot of places in terms of how we establish what we buy technologically, but also how we wire our buildings. Do you have a process in place to determine kind of when they tell you need to do something, whether it's actually a consultative recommendation or whether it's actually a necessity?
I think we have to, in IT, working together, we have to make that determination. You're absolutely right. We have to make a determination of a cost-benefit analysis. There may be a recommendation that based on how we use our system is just not viable for us to do, because there's a certain level of risk that we may be willing to accept compared to if it's the NSC, for example. They have a higher threshold than we do. So we have to make that determination as to what we're willing to live with and what we're not willing to live with. But I think it's important for us to get that done first, and then for us to know where the weaknesses are, and then for us to try to determine if, how, and where we're willing to address those vulnerabilities.
The one thing that I'm going to say, guys, is that, no matter how sophisticated we become in our security, there are pirates on the other side that continue to create structures. I know for a fact in Kentucky, there was a actual pirating of an entire system. And they were requiring money for the school districts to receive their access back. And it was pretty ugly. And we in JCPS, we were victims a couple of times. Well, one major time with a vendor, actually, when requiring a check for $100,000. And they had replicated systems, the whole nine. So an example that I think what you were describing earlier, Raphael, like in my system, even when I log into my computer on any device in my email, it has to send me a code to my phone. While it seems annoying, it's really just the next level that we have to think about taking. So I think as we continue to build, there are people on the other side who built the system for us that turn rogue and find ways to beat it. So that's we'll never have it fully solved, but definitely continue to try to move quickly.
Thank you. I mean, thank you, Dr. Hart. One thing I also want to lay on that is we talked to our commercial liability insurance carrier, which is Arthur Gallagher. They're one of the largest insurance carrier in the world. And what they tell us, they do business in the education and the private sector. What they tell us is they finding out more and more that the pirates and the bad guy are targeting education, school district more, because of the fact that there's a sense that nothing is ever going to happen to us. And we don't want to be that school district where we haven't done everything we can. Now, am I saying after we do everything we can, nothing is going to go wrong? I'm not saying that. But at least we can sit down and say, we've done absolutely everything we can. So if something does happen, we put ourselves in a position to be able to weather. One of the things that we'll be looking at, we've talked to them about, is maybe doing a clone of everything that we have, all our systems. So if someone takes our system at ransom, we don't have to wait to have to recreate everything. We can just deploy the clones and be able to keep working until we can reset the system back to where we need it. But I think it's important for us to stay nimble and have someone come in who is not involved in the process, because a lot of time when you're in the process, it's hard for you to see where your weaknesses are because you're just doing it. You're doing it. You're forgetting to see where someone who's not in the system looking at it can come in and attack you. And that's part of what we're trying to do here. And I think what Dr. Horton addressed is two-step identification factor, which I suspect that's probably going to be one of the recommendations that they give us, because currently we only have one system authentication factor, whereby you log in. So the system is changing every day. And I think it's just important for us to try to stay ahead of it, to protect ourselves from being taken advantage of.
I think also, Raphael, by using a firm that has done a lot of experience with the private sector, they're well ahead of the public sector on that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions as it relates to the cybersecurity audit? If not, the Finance Committee recommends that the contract with Lars for a cybersecurity assessment be presented to the full board for approval.
Second,
Kim,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi, Hilpern,
Yes. And I'm sorry, Raphael, I meant to say thank you for taking the security of not just the infrastructure of the school district, but also student and staff information, very important. We appreciate the steps taken to make sure that those things are tended to properly.
Thank you, sir.
And our discussion item for today is the review of the fiscal year 20 projected and actual revenues and expenditures and the fiscal year 21 draft tentative budgets for the school district and park. So turn it over to Raphael and Kathy.
So we have tonight we have a presentation of FY20 projected actuals and a draft tentative budget. It's not the actual tentative budget. We will meet again in August, and by then we will have completed FY20 information, and we will also share with you financial projections, updated financial projections. We felt that bringing financial projections tonight may be premature, as a lot of information is still developing. We don't even have full 12 months in for the FY20, and we will be bringing multiple scenarios just to cover various different ways of recovery. We mentioned last month that there may be a slow, speedy recovery, so we'll address that. And I just want to acknowledge that we are still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic that is affecting our entire nation, community, District 65 schools, finances, but we are operating. We are providing our students, our families with remote learning, and we also continue to provide services to our community and to our staff. So let's look at the current fiscal year. And these are projected figures, so they are subject to change. Under the circumstances, the numbers are looking pretty good. We are projecting to collect 98% of the revenues and spend 98% of the expenditures. We projected an operating surplus of 5.5 million. Our surplus will be slightly smaller, and it's also because we are prepaying certain FY21 expenditures. At the beginning of the meeting, Raphael discussed workers' compensation premium and commercial liability. It's about 900,000 altogether. We will be actually prepaying these premiums for next year, for FY21, with the current budget. We have room in our budget, and we will be doing it. It's one of the ways to help ourselves for next year, because again, the pandemic is still going on. We don't know if we will have additional expenditures related to social distancing, let's say on the buses, and we have to add additional buses. So again, we're just making room. It's one of our strategies. We actually, District 65 used that strategy in 2009 and 10 when the great recession took place. We did it for a couple of years. So we're doing it again.
Kathy, if I can just, I just wanted to point out that even though we have a surplus this year, I think part of the reason why we have a surplus this year, I just want to point out the timing of our revenue, because the first installment of the 2019 levy was paid in March, just before everything shut down. So that, and we collected pretty much 100% of that receipt, which is why, if you think about it, if you think, why is it with all this stuff going on, with about 15% unemployment and business are functioning, how can we end up with a surplus? The reason why is it was good timing for FY20, in that we were able to receive the majority of the revenue for 80% of our revenue source, which is property taxes, just before everything shut down. Now for FY21, I'm not sure we're going to be that lucky. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, thank you, Raphael. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Even if that pandemic took place a month or 2 months prior, I think our figures would look very different. So, I mean, I don't want to say that the timing was good for that, because it's never a good time for pandemic, obviously, but we certainly were able to collect 100%. Actually, as of now, we are at 100%, which is actually very unusual to be that high for property taxes. But so even if we don't collect another dollar, we have 100% of our property taxes. This table here compares on a high level revenues, budget to actuals, and expenditures to actuals. And you can see that we have two variances. One is a negative. That's the one in red on the top, 2.7 million in revenues. So even though we did very well with property taxes, we still have revenues that are not going to be collected. The category that was affected the most was other local properties, and that's the revenue where that's the category where we have interest income, lunch sales, childcare fees, and because of unprecedented Federal Reserve Bank interest rate cuts back in March, if you remember, 0.75% in 1 week. You know, what we started collected with our investment income started to go down. I mean, because bank react almost immediately because they don't want to lose money. So we started receiving a lot less. Luckily, a big portion of our fund balance is locked in long-term investments. So some of them will be maturing next fiscal year. So we will still earn a higher interest on some of our investments. School closure contributed to the fact that we will not be collecting the budgeted amount for childcare fees, for lunch sales for our students. We delayed deployment of the fees for next year, and the bulk of these fees actually sit in this fiscal year. So we are hoping that with the student fees, we're not going to lose that money, but it's going to be delayed. On the expenditure side, there is a positive variance of 2.1 million, and it's because some of the expenditures, again, due to COVID-19 pandemic, will not be expended in their entirety. Utilities, for example, it's one of them. Also transportation costs. While we are paying for payroll costs for bus drivers, for positive, we're not paying other costs. We're not paying their profit. We're not paying for their gasoline and other maintenance. So we will be saving some money that way to offset that loss of revenues, and that will allow us to prepay some of those expenditures. That amount, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, 133 million includes the amount of prepaid expenditures. So we are already counting in that 0.9 million. So even with that 0.9 million, we still should be under budget. So as a result, our estimated surplus will be close. Again, this surplus is by design, because if you remember from our long-term projection, we had a phase of saving and then spending in our early, right after the referendum. And again, it's by the board made a promise to the community that we're going to be balanced until FY25, and that was part of the design. So that's why our surplus only going to be off. Again, the numbers are subject to change because we still have 1 month, but it should be only off by 600,000. Contribution, so consequently contributions to fund balance, because we don't spend our surpluses, we putting the surpluses to a side, will be less by 600,000. So this is the same information, just in a more visual form. You have in the blue bar is the budget for revenues on the left and for expenditures on the right. And then you see in red the actual collection. And again, we have a description of a variance of about 2.7 million. And then on the right, you will see that the expenditures will come in under budget. This slide shows, because our revenues and our expenditures are grouped by various categories. So you can see exactly where the shortfall is taking place. So we have 2 shortfalls: other local revenues, about 1.6 million. That's the interest income, that's the child care fees, due to school closure, unsold lunches to our students, again, because schools closed, fees, student fees that will be collected possibly in FY21. So that's where that variance is. And then in the state aid categorical, even though state is hopeful that they will pay all of their obligations, just again based on our experience, we know that there are often delays with the state. And what I've seen during my tenure is that sometimes they pay 3 payments. The full allotment are 4 payments for state categories, but sometimes when they are stressed, they will leave the 4th payment and they would kind of play with it. And then sometimes the payment will take place in July or August. As they buying time, they often do it. So again, we are being conservative, and basically we're counting in what's already at a bank. But there could be a possibility that some of those payments will not be collected this fiscal year. We will get the money. We will get the money. The money is allocated, is vouchered, but we will see it in next fiscal year. And same thing on the expenditure. So again, this is more detailed information. You can see, again, 2 variances, one in salaries, which is smaller. Some of our salaries are not being paid because I'm talking about some stipends and some payments related to summer school, and then also supplies and materials, and that's mainly utilities. Some of our utilities are categorized as purchase services, and some are categorized as supplies, and the biggest variance actually will be in supplies and materials. Are there any questions about current fiscal year?
Sergio here, just wanted to ask a little bit about some of the CARES Act funding that's coming from the federal government that'll be distributed from ISB, and how that'll impact this fiscal year.
So we were awarded approximately 800,000 in coronavirus relief funds. The deadline for spending those funds is, I believe, end of September of 2021. We have not allocated, that 800,000 is not in the mix yet, because we really haven't had discussion. First of all, let's see if the money will come. And then when it comes, we will develop a plan where we need to deploy the funds and in which fiscal year the spending will fall, because I can imagine, because it's federal funding, you have to spend it first, and then you have to send proof that you spend it, and then you will be reimbursed. So again, because we haven't had this conversation yet, again, the pandemic is still unfolding. We don't know when the school will start. We may add those funds to the next year's budget if the decision is made that the funds will be spent. And again, we kind of get this information day by day, because it changes very quickly. But again, with revenues, we just want to be conservative.
So Sergio, if I can jump in, that's an interesting question. But I guess what we are trying to say is, based on the fact that the directive for how to get the fund keeps changing, and the process, the applications were open about 2 weeks ago, and we put in the application, but nothing has been said definitively as it relates to the timing of the receipt of the money. We don't want to book it in FY21, and then if it doesn't come for whatever reason, we have a big hole in the budget that we didn't plan for.
And
so if the money does come, go ahead, Dr. Horton.
No, let you finish, and I just want to see if you can actually explain also that a certain percentage of that, I think roughly almost $100,000, will be going to our private schools in the area. Can you explain that also?
Right. So thank you, Dr. Horton, for bringing that up. Is that it's the way the law was written is that the funds will be allocated just like it's actually based on the template for Title I. And Title I, the way Title I works is that the local education LEA, which will be us, we are required to share a percentage of the money with private schools, Catholic schools and private schools. Normally it's Catholic school, but I think the current education secretary put in the legislation that all private school will get a chunk of it too. So in addition to just parochial school, which is normally the entity that gets a flow through from the district, Betsy DeVos requested that other private school be entitled to approximately 100,000 of the receipt. So we wouldn't get to keep all 800,000 of the amount when it comes. We have to distribute it to the private school as the LEA. So that's the reason why we try to be very careful when we expecting revenue that we don't have as much control on, not to build a budget around it and then end up with a big hole at the end of the day. Whereas we're spending money that we don't know how likely we are to receive.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, so Royce-Moore, Caravelli, along with the Catholic schools, will get $100,000 of the 800 that we qualified for, correct?
Approximately. So the way the law is written is that the percentage of kids, we get $800,000, right? And then private schools, depending on the percentage of kids that are Title I eligible, they get part of what we get, just like we currently do with parochial school. So we don't know what we projecting and estimating that is 100,000, but it could very well be more or it could be less. But we have to share more than what we traditionally would share.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Questions about the current fiscal year? If not, let's move to FY21 budget. It will be our 19th consecutive balanced budget. At this point, we are estimating about a surplus, operating surplus of approximately 700,000. We wanted to leave a small cushion because there may be, probably will be adjustment to our revenue assumptions, and we may have additional expenditures to mitigate the effects of the COVID pandemic. I already mentioned the social distancing on busing. There could be additional ones. Spending in our budget is aligned with district's priorities and strategic initiatives, and they include improving instructional core, especially ensuring their students of color have access to Common Core aligned grade level standards. We will be working on our on the district's culture, organizational culture. We started doing it a few years back, so this is a continuation. We're going to continue working on multi-tier system of support. Of course, we are committed to equity now more than ever. Improvement of instructional, and we will continue to make sure that we improve e-learning for our families, for our students. We also working on our recruitment initiatives and professional development. And the last one, of course, we want to make sure that whatever we do, we have financial stability and sustainability. Moving to revenues. Revenues are projected to increase by 1% over FY20 actuals, but they will be decreasing by 1% from the current budget. Property taxes are subject to increase of 1.9 CPI. That's actually a CPI from calendar year of 2018. Usually we feel the effect of the CPI 3 years later. Because of the pandemic, we have adjusted collection rate from 98.5. Our collection rate in Evanston was always high, over 98% to 96%. And we are not sure if we have to actually decrease it even more. But with those two assumptions, with the 1.9 CPI and a lower collection rate, our property taxes are actually flat for next year. So it's a freeze. I mean, for us, it really means a freeze in our biggest revenue source. We also have very big decreases in other local revenues. I already mentioned the categories, primarily investment income. We really don't know what's going to happen with childcare fees, if the families will be able to afford those fees. So again, we are adjusting down some of the assumptions. This slide illustrates historic data for Consumer Price Index, CPI. And just want to show you the CPI that will be affecting next year, the CPI for 2018. We know the increase next year. It's going to be 2.3. Again, we don't know how long the collection rate will be impaired by the pandemic or the economic crisis that will follow. The bar in red represents a projected CPI. And I would say that this is actually a very optimistic projection, because right now the CPI is 0.3%. If I were to bet my money, I would probably bet on something like what we saw in 2008, that it's gonna be very close to zero. Again, if it comes in 1.5, that's gonna be amazing. But again, I think it really depends what's gonna happen with the economy post-pandemic.
I just wanted to point out that it's interesting over the years, whenever we do a revenue projection, we've had folks come at us and say, you were too conservative, you were too conservative.
Yes,
you should do 2%, you should do 2.5%, you should do 3%. And this is some of the reasons why we are conservative with revenue. Because if you were too optimistic and the revenue comes in much lower than what you project, it's got catastrophic ramification for programs, because that's what directs how we choose to spend money. So we always want to make sure that we're super conservative when it comes to revenue and a little bit more aggressive when it comes to expenditure.
It's much easier to add revenues versus build a budget on revenues that do not materialize. So continuing with assumptions for revenues, CPPRT, which stands for Corporate Property, Personal Property Replacement Tax. It's a tax that businesses pay. We are projecting that it will decrease by at least 25%. And again, when we bring the assumptions, when we bring the long-term projections in August, we'll bring projections with different variations, because it may be, again, businesses were paralyzed for almost 3 months. So they were not producing, they were not paying. This number, this decrease may be actually much larger than 25%. Other local revenues are also decreasing by 17%. State funding is projected to be flat. Again, we actually feel optimistic. The state feels optimistic. I know they were able to secure some loans from federal government. So right now we have flat assumption. And also federal revenues are projected to continue to come at stable levels, with actually even some increases for Medicaid revenues. The district has been doing a very good job with reporting. We're going to be probably looking at a new vendor next year to help us with claims. So we feel optimistic about federal revenues.
So if I can go back, Kathy, and talk about the state revenue, income assumption. On last Friday, the legislature actually passed a budget, which is surprising. The budget they passed during the abbreviated legislative session that ended on Friday actually shows no decrease in education funding. It actually even shows some slight increase for special education reimbursement, which is interesting with all the pandemic issue related to state revenue that is going on. But the way the state was able to balance that budget is, as part of the CARES Act, the Federal Reserve is giving out loans to state. And the state of Illinois, if you look at the revenue that the state is projecting to receive in FY21 and compared to the expenditure that is estimated, there's a deficit of $6 billion. And what the state has done is, the state is expecting to get a loan from the Federal Reserve of $5 billion to cover that $6 billion deficit. And there'll be some other additional borrowing. So based on that, the budget that was actually passed actually shows that we will not suffer any decrease in funding. So I just wanted to share that out. I was pleasantly surprised about that. But part of me kind of feels like, wait to see that. But that was the budget that the state passed last Friday.
Thank you. So this pie chart represents our operating revenues, and you can see that the district relies heavily on local property taxes. Almost 79% of our revenue comes from local funding. And again, those revenues will be in a way frozen next year. There will be no increase. Moving to expenditures, our expenditures are increasing 4% over FY20, again, current fiscal year actuals, and 2% over the current budget. And the costs are increasing primarily because of staffing. We have 3.7 new FTEs, net new FTEs in the budget. We also have contractual increases. Current contracts with our educators, with our paraprofessionals will expire at the end of FY24. Cost of transportation, that's another very high increase, 15%. Special education tuition and the park school category is increasing by 11%, and also instructional supplies. So this is a list of new positions, but again, only 3.7 net positions in the budget. We actually adding 31.7 positions, but we eliminating through attrition, we redefining some of the positions, 28. So net 3.7. I'm not gonna read every single position of this from the screen, but you can see that we have 3 positions that are redefined, basically 3 roles and titles of 3 administrators in our districts are changing. And then we have new positions added. The bulk of them are budget neutral. They're funded either with dollars that used to be spent on consultants or other positions. For example, we had facility coordinator position that is not going to be filled. Tommy is retiring, or we have, and we adding 2 positions, 2 maintenance positions. And right now these functions are being covered with overtime. So in a way, we will be saving money by adding some of these positions. Some of the positions, especially the educators positions, the special services positions, are positions that are driven by student needs. So they have to be added by students' IEPs, they have to be added to the budget, or by student enrollment, because you do see one ESL teacher there. And again, 3.7 FTE. We did a lot of work with our budget to make sure that we have a balanced budget. Again, by law, by school law, we have to have a balanced budget. I mentioned attrition, efficiencies. We are renegotiating contracts. This budget will have a substantially smaller amount for consulting services and out-of-state training. The efficiencies that we put in place, they do not affect directly teaching and learning. Certain expenditures are being delayed. We mentioned last time that $1,025,000 dedicated, funded with referendum funds for building capital projects is being delayed for at least 1 year. We also prepaying workers' compensation and commercial liability. So as a result, we are right now projecting a balanced budget. Again, it will look slightly different. Next time you will see tentative budget. But again, we will be, if there are, let's say, additional expenditures that we have to add, additional buses, we'll work to balance that budget. Another pie chart showing the makeup of our expenditures. And again, from what you can take from this chart is that we spent over 80% of our budget on people. 69% are salaries and 12% are benefits. So a very small portion on our budget is actually spent on tangible items and on services. Part of this presentation is also Park School. Park School Advisory Committee met last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago. We reviewed the budget. The committee reviewed the budget for Park School, which is a joint agreement with District 202. Next year, school will serve 71 students, and actually we got a confirmation of another tuition students, so it's actually going to be 72 students, which is great news. Revenues are projected to decrease 2% from the FY20 projected actuals and 8% from FY20 budget. They will actually be adjusted because tuition students pay tuition, which is part of the budget. Each student pays about $75,000 plus the cost of a one-to-one paraprofessional and their benefits if they have one. Expenditures are projected to increase by 6% over actuals and 7% over budget. In case of Park School, 90% of their budget is staffing. So these cost increases are driven by the cost of staff. And as a result of that, the net cost for District 202 and 65, we shared the net cost. We pay, District 65 pays 60% of the cost, and District 202 pays 40% of the cost. That cost, which is reflected in our budget, District 65 budget, I know it's strange because it's one of our schools, but it's actually a separate school district with its separate budget, separate set of financial statements. So that cost will increase by 5% next time when you adjust for the late revenues from FY 19. We're not in 29 yet. So this slide, this is what we presented in February of 2020. I know it seems like ancient history, even though it was only 3 months ago. And back then, we were projecting a balanced budget through FY23. It's no longer the case. We will be working very hard, probably right after we finish working on this budget, on balancing future budgets. And we have to have a long-term strategy because it really depends on the economic situation, and it will shape basically the model, the educational model the district will be able to afford. The board 3 years ago asked us to make sure that we account for referendum reserves every year. We put a portion of the surplus into our reserves. So we started with 18.5 million. So that was the first year. That's what we added to our reserves. And even though our referendum amount is 14.5 million in the first year, you get time and a half. So we got more money in the first year. Then in the following year, we added 6.4 million. This year in FY20, we budgeted 4.2 million. We know that we're not going to be able to add the whole amount. So we are projecting 3.6 million addition for the total amount of 28.5. So again, those reserves are growing. We're in the phase of saving. There are a lot of uncertainties. Obviously, pandemic can affect the collection rate. We really worry about the 2020 CPI factor because, again, I think it's going to be very small. And things that we mentioned in prior meetings, property tax freeze, pension cost shift, they're not completely dead. I mean, those legislations may surface as a part of the deal or a larger package for the progressive income tax, but they are out there. I just want to, we put them on that sheet in the presentation just to let you know that all of these uncertainties still exist and still can affect our finances. And this is the next step in the budget creation process. On August 10th, we will share with you a tentative budget and updated financial projections. And again, we will be bringing several different scenarios. On September 21st, there will be a public hearing on the tentative budget and adoption of the final budget at the same meeting, and then we have 30 days to file the budget. So that's all we had. Any questions?
I have a question. That was a really big picture view of the budget. So thank you. I have a pretty narrow question reflective of the COVID-19 situation. Are you, as a function of the business office, tracking, or have you created a new budget line item or coding number to track how much money is spent as a result of the COVID-19 situation, whether it's PPE equipment for staff, cleaning supplies, things that we otherwise would not have purchased?
Yeah, we track it. We can't really create a separate code because these things are supplies. You know, they part of programs that already exist, but we are tracking these expenditures. So yeah, yes, the answer is yes, we're doing it.
So to your point, Joey, we can come up with a total amount of money that's been spent. We have the receipt and the backup information to be able to substantiate that information.
Okay, because one of the questions at some point would be, and I don't know that I need an ongoing number, but right, the CARES Act provides a certain amount of money. The idea there is to support districts with what they need as a result of the pandemic. And one of the questions I have is that a realistic number? Is it, do we get more than we needed? Or do we not get enough? And if there's a gap there somehow, both that's good information for us as board members in terms of advocacy and reaching out to our elected leaders on behalf of the district. If we got more than we needed, then it's a discussion around how do we prudently use that those dollars in the right way for the future, because there is a lot of unknowns here. So thank you for letting us know that you are tracking that.
Mm-hmm. And I would say the short answer to this question will be that we are not getting enough. And to give you an example, in 2008, with the Great Recession, when not the whole country, but just one sector was affected. We got about $3 million. Now we only getting 800,000, and we talking about impact on every single revenue source in our budget and additional expenditures. So, I would say that this amount is not going to be enough.
And
I
we're being
just
asked
wanted,
to. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that another perspective that I think would be helpful to take is that we are actually very fortunate compared to a lot of community. And I want us to realize that in that we have a very solid tax base, we have an excellent collection rate. And the communities around us who are in the Illinois, Chicagoland area, who do not have the same level of tax base, property wealth, and collection rate that are going to be in worse shape than we are. So we are concerned, but I think it's also important to note that compared to a lot of other school districts, we're in a very good shape.
Other questions from the board?
I had just thank you for this presentation, and I can only imagine how difficult it is to try to create a budget with so many uncertainties out there. My question is regarding the reclassified and added positions for next year. In particular, and I don't know, this maybe is a question for Phil or Heidi or for Dr. Horton, on the 12 learning behavior specialists, if we could hear a little bit more about that. I think in, maybe it was Romy's presentation or in some other presentation, there was reference to 12 additional special education educators. And so I'm assuming
That's who those are.
Can we just hear a little bit about what that, because I believe that's a new class, like the learning behavior specialist is a new position. So can we just hear a little bit about what that is?
Those are, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Those are our special education teachers. When Romy worked to conduct an audit of her department, one of the things that she found is that we had some caseload issues that needed to be resolved. We are also aware of the fact that we have some learning gaps for our children of color, as well as for our children who have individualized education plans. So that is specifically designed to address those organization needs.
Okay, great, thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question. Kathy, you had mentioned that y'all will be getting to work on making a plan for the projected shortfalls that are coming up. And I'm just curious if y'all could tell us a little bit more about thoughts that are, or plans that are in place to engage stakeholders in those discussions.
I think if I can jump in, based on the conversation we've had with Dr. Horton. Dr. Horton is very convinced that the best action to take is to engage community members and stakeholders in how we decide to manage the increase in the growth of the budget. So that is something that is talked to us about while we're preparing the budget for FY21. So that is in fact something that we are going to do. It's not a decision that we're going to make on our own. It's not a decision that Cabinet is going to make on its own. It's going to be driven by input from folks who have stake and folks in the community, and of course board members, as to how the decision is made as to what to let go of and what not to let go of.
And so just to kind of piggyback on that, we have to brainstorm and come up with a process that will make sense in this virtual world, so we can get feedback that's valuable. I would love for us to be able to go to certain parts of Evanston and kind of present our budget and get some feedback and using a model art type process, but it's very difficult to do that. We can't do that now, of course. And then virtually, it would not necessarily be able to get the same type of participation. So we'll be working on a structure. And if you guys have any suggestions or recommendations of how to do that with the community, we'll be open to it for sure.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that the board really directed the administration to begin looking at cuts internally that could continue to streamline and create greater sustainability for our school district. And we've engaged in those conversations with cabinet members during the past semester. And so a number of those things have already been identified. I think, Anya, to your point of engaging the community, it really needs to be around additional measures that need to be taken. Because we're gonna have to dig really deeply in order to have our finances targeted to be able to achieve these very aggressive goals that we have for closing the achievement gap, as well as continuing to strengthen our equity practices in the district.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the budget presentation? Kathy, Raphael, thank you. It's odd that felt like a positive budget presentation, but relative to past ones, but such are the times.
I really think it is a positive budget presentation because, as I said earlier before, we're in a better shape than a lot of school districts. And I think for all the work that we have ahead of us, for the work that we want to do to increase student achievement, especially focusing on students of color, Black and brown children, we have the resources to be able to start addressing that compared to some of the other school districts in the area. So with all that is taking place, with all that is still going on, I feel very sanguine and encouraged about our access to resources to be able to do this important work.
Thank you, Raphael. And I think I love hearing you say that we have the resources, because I think the biggest part of this puzzle is figuring out how to put the money in the right places in a more efficient manner, so that it meets our bigger goals for equity and for student achievement, particularly for our students of color, and making sure that our system is right-sized instead of in an upsize and downsizing momentum. So that will be the task before us as we get to the other side of summer. So without anything else, any other discussion items, we'll close this Finance Committee meeting at 7:47.